All right, if you want to be turning in your Bible to the book of Obadiah, and if you're using a physical Bible, you got to be careful or you'll miss it, because it's the shortest book in the Old Testament. And tonight we will try to cover it, but before we do that, I want to actually spend some of our time talking about some things that maybe have surfaced in the last books of the minor prophets that we've studied, and kind of maybe bring some things into clarity that will lead us into the book of Obadiah. And so I want to, and maybe I hinted at this a bit last week as well, but I want to begin by considering this question: who is God judging in the prophets? Who is God judging in the prophets? I don't know what your habits are of reading Scripture. I don't know if you have a habit. I don't know if you have tried to read the Bible in a year, if you've tried to read the Bible in 10 years, if you try to read the New Testament in 40 days. You know, there's all kinds of different reading plans out there. I don't know what yours is. I do know that in my own life, and also in talking to all sorts of people, reading the prophets can sometimes be a bit of a depressing task, right? The words of the prophets are rarely, I'm so proud of what you guys are doing, right? That is not typically what the prophets are sent by God to say. Usually they arrive with a wake-up call for the people. Usually they're there to call the people to covenant faithfulness, to abandon the idolatry that they've given themselves up. Sometimes they're there just to announce it doesn't even matter. You're a lost cause. You know, this is not exactly an encouraging thing to read at times. But I'd like to maybe peel that back just a little bit and make sure that we don't make an assumption about who God is judging in the prophets that we may not even realize that we're making. Because sometimes we read words like, all the people are going to be obliterated or judged, or, you know, all these different sorts of things. And yet, at the same time, the prophets introduce this complex tension, like in Hosea 1, where God says, you're not my people. You're never going to be my people. I will never, ever forgive you. That's verse 9. And then verse 10 is, yet you will be my people. And you, the people of Israel and the people of Judah, will be joined together as my children. And so you say, how can both of these things be the case? So, the prophets, they speak of judgment coming upon Israel and Judah, predominantly. And at times, the language is in absolute terms. So in Amos 9, as another example, verses 1 through 4, there's a statement of utter devastation and destruction. If you look at Amos, 9, 1 through 4, with my very inefficient flipping through my 3-ring binder. Amos 9, 1 through 4, I saw the Lord standing beside the altar, and he said, strike the capitals until the thresholds shake, and shatter them on the heads of all the people. And those who are left of them I will kill with the sword. Not one of them shall flee away, not one of them shall escape. If they dig into Sheol, that's the grave, from there shall my hand take them. If they climb up to heaven, from there I will bring them down. If they hide on top of Mount Carmel, from there I will search them out and take them. If they hide from my sight at the bottom of the sea, there I will command the serpent, and it shall bite them. And if they go into captivity before their enemies, there I will command the sword, and it shall kill them. And I will fix my eyes upon them for evil and not for good. Reading the prophets can be a depressing task. It speaks in language of absolute destruction. But what I'd like to surface tonight, or just remind ourselves of tonight, is that when God is speaking to Israel, or when God is speaking to Judah, he's talking about this entity, this nation that shares a covenant with God. If you look at Hosea 1, I won't regurgitate all that because we just referenced it, but if you look at Hosea 1, the idea is that this collective whole, this nation, this society has broken covenant with God. And therefore, the society as a whole, spoken of as this entity, is going to cease to exist. So there's an idea in the prophets, and I'm going to make this more clear. This is kind of dense, but we'll bring it to life. The prophets, they're really talking about a judgment against the powers that be that are ordering and directing Israelite society, Judean society. Like in Amos 5:2, fallen, never to rise again is the virgin Israel and all of that. The judgment is focused on the leaders and the collective whole that make up the society. Now, does that mean that the ordinary, everyday people are not going to suffer? No. Does it mean that all ordinary, everyday people are righteous and holy? Doesn't mean that either. But what we find in the prophets is that there are individuals in the nation that are going to suffer, but some of them are righteous people. Like in Amos 2 verse 6, it talks about the people in power trampling on the righteous. So in the midst of all the language of judgment, the nation is going to come to an end. That's the word from God about Israel. Never to rise again. About these northern tribes. It's going to be gone, obliterated, and done with. That's what Hosea says. And yet, God can say in Hosea, like in Hosea 13, but I will ransom you from the grave. I will not give you up. How can he say both of those things? Well, he's judging the nation. He's judging the society that has given birth to all sorts of idolatry and violence. But there are people within the nation that God is looking at and has made a commitment to, a covenant with them as individuals that is not going to be broken simply because they belong to, as Isaiah says, a people of unclean lips. This is the same kind of idea as is found like in the story of Elijah. You remember how he felt like he was all alone? There's nobody there? And God said, "What are you talking? I've got people you don't know about here. Right? There are other righteous people. You just don't happen to know them." Well, Elijah had a message of judgment as a prophet, but God brought to his attention, there's still some righteous people here, even if there's a judgment that's coming on the whole. Now, are you with me so far? Is that you following what I'm saying? So when I'm reading the words of judgment in the prophets, what I ought to be doing, I think, is realizing that the entire nation is going to suffer because the society is going to be undone. That's going to be something that causes immense pain and suffering. But the reason that things are going to unravel is because some individuals, but even more importantly, the powers within the nation have chosen rebellion against God, and therefore, eventually, God has had enough. To make this a little bit clearer for you, or to bring it to life, the language in Scripture about the powers, about the nations, about including Israel and Judah, but the power structures of the world, the prophets, they help us develop a perspective that sees that human societies of all different kinds, whether it's the people of God, the Israelites, the people of Judah, or whether it's, as we'll see later, Edom, or whether it's Babylon or whatever, that human societies become idolatrous. The society itself, the power itself becomes an idol. And we'll bring this next point to life here. Demonic forces routinely work through societal powers to cause great evil. What do we mean by that? Well, think about Ephesians chapter 6, verses 10 through 13. And I now, for the second time in a row, have brought my binder and not my Bible, so shame on me. But Ephesians chapter 6, this is the armor of God stuff, or passage, but what does he say? He says, I'll just read you verse 12. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood. So who do we wrestle against? According to Paul, the rulers, the authorities, the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. For this reason, when we read the Old Testament, very often what we find is the story is not being told about God and random individuals. Have you noticed that when you read the Old Testament, there's a lot left out? There's a lot of probably really interesting people that don't get near as much airtime as there are some people that are pretty lousy and somewhat insignificant. Just think about somebody like Balaam, for instance. Well, we're spending all this time reading about Balaam and his oracles, you know. There's a reason. Balaam, he's got a message to the powers. He's got a message to these outsiders who are looking at the people and saying, now's our time. And he says, not so fast. God has a word for you. And so we pay attention. But what we see in the Old Testament is really a story that shows that God is sovereign as king over all other attempts to gain power, to have strength, to have stability. As a couple of examples of this, first of all, the second psalm would be, I think I'd say the quintessential text, but the second psalm is in many ways like the psalm of psalms. Certainly the New Testament seems to agree. But the idea that all of the nations, all of the powers, all of the kings and rulers, David or whoever wrote the second psalm says, in various ways, they're all scheming and plotting against the Lord and against His anointed, against the Messiah. New Testament's going to identify that Messiah as Jesus, of course. But to remember the image of Psalm 2, that if you read it a few times is so impressed in the mind. Jesus, to bring the New Testament into the Psalm, Jesus is pictured as the Son who rules over the nations, and He's got a rod of iron in His hand. And nation rises up, a nation plots against Him. Psh, psh, psh. This is very similar to Nebuchadnezzar's dream, right? With the stone that rolls into the kingdoms that rise up and they can't outlast, can't even begin to overcome the kingdom of God that Jesus came and announced. Similar things present, all Psalm 86, 8 and 9, this idea that it's not just God is great. God is great. The great king above, what do you remember? He's the great king above all gods. The Lord is a great God, the great king above all gods. We sing that song, right? In His hands are the depths of the earth. The mountain peaks belong to Him. The sea is His, He made it. You know that one? Psalm, was it 83, I think? 82, 83, one of those. Pictures, it's a fascinating passage, but it pictures God storming into the divine council, like in Job 1, and saying, essentially, I've had enough. I've had enough of the injustice. You so-called gods are perpetuating injustice and unrighteousness in the world. And so God dashes them to pieces, basically, and sits on the throne and rules over the people. Now, not to make so much of that, but the idea is the Bible presents a picture that when human societies gather together, there is always a degree to which the collection of power is twisted by satanic, demonic influence to try to lead people to use that combined power to do harm to other people. And in the Old Testament, as well as in the New to some degree, there's this idea that the Lord, sitting on the throne, watches as the cup of unrighteousness fills, and eventually it can't be filled anymore. Eventually his wrath is poured out. Why is it that the people of Israel were in Egypt for 400 years? Well, there's probably a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons, if you remember, is the iniquity of the Canaanites was not yet full, was not yet bad enough that God was ready to take decisive action against them. Sometimes we read about the conquests of Canaan, and we have a sense of uneasiness, and certainly there's plenty to be said about that as a topic. But the idea in Deuteronomy, the idea in Joshua, the idea even back in Exodus is that the people of Israel are not going into Canaan because they want land, but rather because God, Yahweh, has seen the actions of the nations, the powers that have risen up in Canaan, and is deeply disturbed by what he has seen and is going to take action to establish justice. Child sacrifice is going on, for one thing. And it appears that begins to be adopted even to some degree in Israel later on and is the source of some of the judgment. Think about one more example of this, and then we'll move on. Go back to Exodus in your mind. Go back to the story of Moses and Pharaoh. God tells Moses, I want you to go down to Egypt, and I want you to say to the Pharaoh, let my people go. It's a strange thing. God tells Moses, look, I've made you like God to Pharaoh. Moses would say to Pharaoh, let my people go. He says, you're representing me in a very specific and special way. Why was it that God chose to send a person to Pharaoh to make the announcement, let my people go? God's representative. Well, who was Pharaoh? Who did he represent? In Egypt, who did he represent? Their gods. Yeah. He's their God, right? Representative. And God says, I'm going to send a representative. And the whole story of the Exodus, it's a many, many things, of course, many layers here. I don't want to make this point too comprehensively, but the story of Exodus is a story of Yahweh God versus the gods of Egypt. Who's going to win in this exchange? And so, staff on the ground, snake, staff on the ground. Well, they've got a snake. Yeah, but that one eats that one, you know. Why does God choose to do 10 plagues? Why not just say, you didn't listen to me, you're dead. Now my people are coming out. These are the gods of Egypt. God is showing 10 times in very different ways that the Egyptians, they have their gods they worship, but Yahweh, the Lord of hosts, He's sovereign over the gods of the Egyptian world. He's the great king above all gods. He's the great king above all powers. He's the great king above the Egyptian empire on a physical level with Pharaoh and his chariots. Is it a coincidence that in delivering the people from Egypt, God does not, again, somehow blind everyone, bring them out? Where did they go? No, He summons their whole army. Come on out here. Come out to the wilderness. Come out to the banks of the Red Sea, and let's see who's God. Amos has some of this language. Obadiah is going to have this language as well. But this idea of reading the Old Testament as a story bigger, not less, but bigger than me as an individual connecting to God. There is that element. But this is the story of God who is God above all powers and who will act when those powers misuse their authority to do great harm. And the question is not if a nation, if a society, if a people will plot against the purposes of God. The question is really, perhaps not even when, but to what degree and how quickly. Now, I have said much. Would anyone like to share anything you've got in your mind here, or a question? Rock. Yeah. Yeah.
Pharaoh laughed in his face. He didn't realize what was going to happen. It just took 10 plagues just to convince him.
Yeah. Yeah.
He kept breaking his promise. His people had to suffer for it. It just wasn't even necessary.
Yes, but you make a very interesting point, which is, or at least an extension of what you're saying is, in the story of the 10 plagues, was every single Egyptian extremely wicked and vile and evil? But did every Egyptian suffer from the plagues? So sometimes God's actions in this sense, they affect everyone, but if we can see the actual story, if we can see the drama that's unfolding, we see beyond just me and see that this is really a story about who God is as the king over all powers. And this goes back all the way to Genesis 11. Well, it goes back further, but it goes at least back to Genesis 11, right? Where what do we do when we've fallen from God's good creation and we are unsure about what the future holds? What do? Well, we say to each other, let's get together and let's build a tower up into the heavens. Let's make a name for ourselves. Let's make ourselves great and powerful so that we don't have to fear. That's what we do. And back in Genesis 11, God was watching that and said, that's going to lead you places that you don't want to go. And intervened. And the story of the Old Testament is that story playing out again. I've said that. Oh, by the way, in Exodus, you can notice 10 times in Exodus, God makes the announcement, whether to Pharaoh, whether to Moses, to the people. When such and such happens, right? When the plagues happen, you shall know that I am Yahweh. In other words, you'll know the name of the true God when you see the things that I do. And this is the story that plays out again and again. So, moving into Obadiah. Many of the people, or many of the prophets, they speak of judgment against Israel and Judah because they're in covenant with God. They're supposed to be the closest to God. And they've forsaken God. They become aligned with the powers. They trust in the nations. Literally, they make alliances with other world powers. But figuratively, they trust in the gods of wealth and even religious experience, their own strength, what they've accomplished as a society and as individuals. So it makes sense that the focus is on them. But there are a few prophets who remind us, just like the Exodus story, who remind us that the Lord is the judge of all the nations, that He is exalted above all the powers, and this is not just a story of God and Israel and Judah. This is a story of God over all the nations. So in Obadiah tells us a fascinating story in, 20 or so verses, 21 verses. And the story is hard to start because it doesn't have a date. The vision of Obadiah. That's how it starts. There are a couple of proposals for when Obadiah was likely written. It seems to me that it was written during the time of Babylonian conquest. Now, I'll tell you why in just a minute. But it's a bit hard to begin. Nevertheless, if we just take it and say, let's just follow this where it takes us, what we find is that this short book announces that God has seen Edom's evil. Who's Edom? Who's the ancestor of a patriarch of Edom? Esau. You remember what the word Edom means, or Esau means? Red, right? Of course, we know about Esau having red hair and a great amount of red hair. But Edom as a place is also got a lot of red dirt, and there's a lot of interesting things about why Edom was able to exist for quite some time. They have a lot of, rocky crags and stuff where people can make little fortresses or defenses, I guess I should say. And anyway, it's very interesting. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. We've heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger, an envoy, has been sent among the nations. Rise up, let us rise against her for battle. Here's what God says. Behold, I'm going to make you small among the nations. You shall be utterly despised. This is a stern word of judgment. They don't think it can happen. They're proud. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the clefts of the rock in your lofty dwelling, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the ground? Though you soar aloft like the eagle, though your nest is set among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. Again, just to make this point once more, this is the capital L-O-R-D, and I think it's important here because Edom is not going to say a god of some. They believe in all kinds of gods, right? A god must not have thought we were very good. This is Israel's God. This is our God. This is Yahweh who declares, yeah, I've got my people here. I'm still sovereign over where you are too. And I see what you're doing. And I've had it. So he goes on to basically say that the day of the Lord is going to come upon them, and God's going to enact his justice. There's a day coming when God is going to be seen as the sovereign king, and he's not going to tolerate their wickedness anymore. And so, this is very, very vivid metaphorical language here. But he says, if thieves came to you, if plunderers came by night, interrupts, how you have been destroyed. Would they not only steal enough for themselves? He says, if the grape gatherers, they came to you, would they not leave gleanings? How Esau has been pillaged, his treasures sought out. He goes on. The idea is, God says, when a thief comes, he doesn't take everything. The guy coming and taking your grapes, he's going to leave something behind. I'm not going to leave anything behind in my judgment against you. Why? Why is this going to happen? Well, verse 10 through 14 tells us why it's going to happen. In one sentence, it's going to happen because of the violence done to your brother Jacob. Shame shall cover you. You shall be cut off forever. But what have they done? This is the interesting part. Because he specifies, I think I wrote down, what was it? Was it eight things that they did and should not have done, or that they, 8 things that they should not have done in verses 12 through 14. Just 12 through 14, or 11 through 14. On the day that you stood aloof, on the day strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you were like one of them. Now, by the way, here in verses 12 through 14, this is a random little note for you, but you hear how it says in the ESV, but do not gloat over the day of your brother. Several other versions render this differently, which makes a lot more sense. And it has to do with context and some linguistic stuff. But really, I think the idea is you should not have gloated over the day of your brother. Is this talking about something that's already happened? You should not have rejoiced over the people of Judah in their day of ruin. You should not boast in the day of distress. You should not have entered the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. You should not have gloated over his disaster in the day of his calamity. You should not have looted his wealth in the day of his calamity. You should not have stood at the crossroads to cut off his fugitives, refugees. You should not have handed over his survivors in the day of distress. There's a lot happening there. But basically, Edom in Obadiah is pictured as standing there, I believe, while Babylon is destroying Judah, Jerusalem in particular. Edom is standing there, and they're smiling and laughing and saying, oh, it's about time. Edom, not particularly big fan of Israel, right? Jacob and Esau. But then it's a bit worse than that. They say, you know what? Gate's open over there. Why don't we just come in and see what they had? You know, they've been all taken off into exile. Let's just come in here and see. Oh, that's pretty nice TV right there. Oh, this will look good in the kitchen. They're going in and they're taking everything that belonged at one point to people that were living in Jerusalem and Judah. And they're sneaking in and they're doing this because there's no defenses. It's worse than that. They figured out that there are people that are running away from Jerusalem, trying to flee the conquest and captivity. And they found all the little roads around there where people are trying to get away. And what are they doing? They're stopping people in their tracks And they're calling the Babylonians over and saying, we've got 10 more. What do you give us for 10 that we've captured that are trying to escape the impending judgment and wrath? That appears to be the culmination of when God's patience has run out entirely. But then something happens in Obadiah, which is the case in reading the prophets very often. So, you get it. Judgment's coming on Edom. This isn't about Edom. Edom is just a representative of how God is sovereign over all the nations. In Obadiah 15, there's only one chapter, there's a shift. There's a shift when God begins to address. He says, the day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head. We're now talking about not Edom, we're talking about all the nations. We're talking about everyone. God is saying, listen, yeah, I noticed what they did, but I noticed what everybody's doing. And I'm going to act in my time for justice. And we've talked about how this idea of the day of the Lord, it's not, at least not necessarily talking about the return of Jesus from the clouds. This is talking about moments in history, certainly that will be the climactic one, but moments in history when God intervenes to tear down, as he says in Jeremiah, to pluck up and to plant, to bring about change in order to limit the degree of injustice and evil that's done in the world. The day of the Lord is near upon all the nations. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your deeds shall return on your own head. He goes on to describe that. He uses a metaphor of them drinking so much wine that they are reduced to nothing, that they are totally disoriented, staggering, fallen to get up no more, that kind of idea. That picture is a frequent one in the prophets about the cup of God's wrath that is going to be poured out on the nations, at some points on Israel. What does Jesus say in the Garden of Gethsemane? Interesting. In verse 17 and 18, he's talking about just this idea that there are going to be those who take refuge in God's kingdom. And he uses Mount Zion as representative of that. And they're going to experience salvation. They're going to experience another frequent theme in the prophets, a reversal of fates. And this is from the New Testament perspective. We can read this and understand this as being spiritual and symbolic and poetic. That this is a statement of God's decisive victory on behalf of his people, and his people are going to be saved and redeemed. But the way that it's described as, well, the people of Israel someday are going to be redeemed, and they're going to possess the land of the Canaanites. They're going to possess the cities of the Negev. Saviors, deliverers shall go up to Mount Zion to rule Mount Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. You can understand how there becomes an expectation in the early first century Jewish community that there could be some military conquest, right? I mean, it's not like they thought that for no reason, but obviously Jesus teaches us to interpret the Old Testament correctly. Now, final things, and I must say, in this class, I'm talking to you so much, and you're being so patient with me, and I appreciate that. I really mean it when I say how much I have enjoyed studying these books, and the problem is the more I enjoy studying something, the less organized my train of thought is, because there's just so much interesting things to say. I appreciate you. Let me say one more thing. In Hebrews, let's do Colossians instead, okay? Hebrews focuses in on that Mount Zion image as in Jesus. We live in Mount Zion, the place where fates are reversed. But Colossians will tie together what we've talked about up to this point, both in Obadiah, but more importantly, even the conversation before about what was this story about? And is it about more than just God and individuals? Well, Paul certainly thought it was. He tells the story of Jesus, essentially. He talks about in chapter 1, Jesus before and Jesus through the cross, reconciling people, delivering them. But now in chapter 2, he's talking about really the experience of conversion. In him you also were circumcised, at verse 11, with a circumcision made without hands, by putting off the body of the flesh, by the circumcision of Christ, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you also were raised with him through faith, in the powerful working of God, who raised him from the dead. Okay, we're with him so far. And you, who were dead in your trespasses and the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made alive together with him, having forgiven us all our trespasses, by canceling the record of debt that stood against us with its legal demands. I'm so glad that Paul says that he set aside the record of debt that stood against us, nailing it to the cross. It's like verse 15 could just be dropped off there. But there's a verse 15. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame by triumphing over them in him. This means that the cross is more than about personal salvation. It's not less. It's more. That in the cross and the subsequent empty tomb, God has definitively declared to the Greco-Roman nation world, to the very secular, or pagan and idolatrous, and to the self-righteous and hypocritical Jewish world, this is what wisdom looks like. This is what power looks like. This is what life looks like. You think it's death, it's life. And the Son with the cross reigns with the iron rod of Psalm 2. And that's all the time that we have. But we'll look forward to picking up more and be happy to talk to anyone and everyone about this if you'd like. All right, that's it.